Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Charlotte Rampling. Charlotte, can I remind you of the last time we met, that night together we had in that London hotel?
That intimate night we had?
Just you and me and how many other people?
Oh, yes, it was 4 million other people, 4,000 at least.
Yes, that was the BAFTA Awards. A night to remember indeed.
Oh, yes, I remember it well.
You have played over the years quite often wicked, smouldering ladies. Is this a role that you've been kind of trapped into? Or is it your looks that have made you do it, or do you actually relish these parts?
Well, it's not a particularly practical thing to do every day. I mean, Michael, if you'd like to think of me swanning down spiral staircases in gold lame and falling about in silken...
I would like to think of that, yeah.
Falling about in silken cushions and waiting to seduce or to be seduced, then I would, you know, be quite willing to leave you with that fantasy. But the reality possibly is very different.
Did you fantasize as a child? Did you go through the usual dressing up business?
Yes, quite a lot. Quite a lot.
What sort of family was yours?
Military family. My father was a colonel. Well, I mean, in fact, if you are a colonel, you always are a colonel, but in fact, he did stop being a colonel in 1960, but he still is a colonel.
Oh, yes. They never call themselves private, do, when they've stopped being in the army, but they do stick to the other bit. So did this mean you had a kind of itinerant childhood, that you were wandering around the world?
We wandered around England, and we landed up in France, which is the reason I speak French, which has helped me, in fact, in the latter part of my life.
Because you live in France?
Because I live now in France and married to a Frenchman. But it was mainly England where we wandered.
But was there any sense a destiny for you to become an actress? Did you feel that?
Well, I started doing, in fact, it wasn't drama I went into, it was more singing and dancing, if you can believe it. Because there was the place where I lived in Stanmore, they had an amateur dramatic society, and each year they put on a concert called the Smoking Concert. And they asked all the people to come in and do little sketches. And as my sister and I spoke French at that time, because we'd been to a French school where my father was posted in Fontainebleau, we thought it might be quite fun to do a kind of cabaret-type singing, dancing act, which we did, which was quite sort of risque at the time, not very much so now. We wore belted raincoats, fishnet tights, beret, all the thing, and we sang C'est si bon and Oh la la la, c'est magnifique, and we were quite coy and sweet.
And how old were you then?
I was 14 at the time.
Ah.
And we were, in fact, spotted by a talent scout during those few years that we did that, who wanted us to come up and audition for a show in London in a nightclub. And all went fine. We were very chuffed and very thrilled. I was, I think, about 15 at the time. And then he started to say, the producer of the show, before the audition, started to say, well, of course, the act with the belted raincoats and the beret, and it's all very sweet, but maybe we could start by beginning to take off the belted raincoat and leave perhaps just the black fishnet tights. Well, you can imagine that the colonel at that stage, whether we wanted to continue or not, said emphatically, no. And so my debut into cabaret was dramatically finished.
I had to wait for a few years. You did emerge as an actress in the 60s, and you were very firmly and quickly implanted as that sort of naughty image. Were you kind of tailor-made for the 60s, do you feel?
Do you feel so?
Well, there was an element of what you did that could only have been in the 60s, that you had that look, that style, didn't you?
Well, I don't know, because people said, in fact, that I didn't have that particular style, because I remember when, after I got my first break, so to speak, with the Bolting brothers in Rotten to the Core, I was 18 at the time, I had an agent at that time who said, but my dear, your eyes are completely uncommercial, they're completely unmodern. The eyes of nowadays are very wide awake and open, fresh-faced, clear, Jean Shrimpton, Twiggy. It's all that syndrome that is actually working. Your eyes are too hooded and too threatening. And he said, yes, threatening. And he said, perhaps you could do with a lifting. Well, I know that a lot of women think about lifting at a certain stage in their life, and perhaps in the latter part of their life, but I was 18, and I think a lifting appeared
a bit early.
Absurd. So
he was a silly man, because Eric Morecambe once advised Ken Dodd to get his teeth fixed. It's the same. Same kind of silliness.
It's the same syndrome.
But you did have a pretty wild time, didn't you? I mean, you went off and did some interesting things as a kid.
Yes, but I think what happened in the 60s was that it was possible to have a wild time, and before it had never been possible. Now it's possible for a lot of young people to have a wild time, and nobody really gives a damn. But then, in the 60s, it hadn't happened before. And so that the floodgate was open, and we all swept through on that floodgate and did possibly, in quotes, outrageous things, which possibly now aren't that outrageous, but at the time they were, because it was freedom, there were no more social barriers, people could do and think as they pleased, in quotes, and as I was in the entertainment business, I was not a success, but I was one of the young who were in the public eye at that time. I was sort of swept along with the flow.
You've worked with big names, I mean, Paul Newman and Robert Mitchum. Then you worked with Woody Allen. A very complex man, I should think, isn't he? He makes us laugh, but I've got a feeling he's not that easy a person.
Well, it's the kind of laugh that, in fact, you know, underneath it all, there's an enormous sadness. But what he has is he has an extraordinary distance of life, which is perceived through a lot of suffering, which a lot of comedians have. And he makes us laugh through the vision that he has on his own suffering. It's a kind of sense of humour that related particularly to me. So it was...
It attracted you?
Yes, very much so.
Did he fall in love with you?
Well, he likes to think he does. I don't know whether he does, but he does like to think that he does. I think he chooses women, in fact, now, because he said to me that the thing that's wonderful about being a film director and being now, at the time, because after Annie Hall he became a very well-known film director, is that I can ask beautiful women to come and play with me. And, so I came and played with him.
Well, you're very much a family person now. You've got children, and you're domesticated to an nth degree, and you live in France. Do you find this is professionally very difficult for you? Does it restrict your work?
No, I think what if a woman wants it in this business, which is particularly difficult because there are a lot of temptations and a lot of meeting of all sorts of interesting people, I think you have to decide at a certain stage if you want to spend a certain amount of time in your life developing the other side of your life, which is a private life. And I decided for a few years to really develop that because I found somebody that I wanted to do it with, that was all.
What about the work then? I mean, you've smouldered away for years. What will you do when the fire goes out?
Do you really think it's going to go out?
No, I don't. I shall fan the flames for as long as possible. Anyway, well, that's a lovely moment to pause and think about it. So for the moment, Charlotte Rampling, thank you very much indeed.